Welcome to the podcast, Chris Graham and Rod Mullins, and we're going to wrap up the championship four race in Arizona over the weekend and talk a lot of NASCAR. Rod, welcome, and Joey Logano, the winner, and a guy that we'll talk a little bit later about where he would have finished in the old Winston Cup standings. It
Yep.
wouldn't have been first or anywhere near first, but he gets to be the champion. And boy, he got into the championship eight because of a sort of
Mhm.
technicality, and he's the champion of 2024.
Yeah, there are people that are probably going to argue this until, the cows come home 20 years from now over the fact of Joey Logano winning this championship. It's much like what they did here several years ago when I think they made the first switch over to this playoff system. And of all people, Matt Kenseth won the championship that year. So we've got a lot of people that still of this thing of I don't like it. I don't like the playoff system. Kevin Harvick is like, hey, I like the playoff system. Let's make it a little bit more spicy. You've got some others in there that are just like, let's throw it out. Let's just get rid of it completely. Let's do something different with it. That's not going to happen, according to Steve Phelps and Steve O'Donnell with the state of the sport message at Phoenix. The playoffs are going to remain the same. There might be some rule changes. And I think the big thing about the rule changes is going to be the thing about helping out a competitor or helping out a fellow team, a car or a manufacturer, anything like that. I think they're going to lower the boom there. They did lower the boom with all the fines and so forth coming into the Phoenix race after Martinsville. But it's like I put in an article. You've opened up the Pandora's box. This has been going on for years and years and years, and yet, now you're going to say something about it. What's the big deal about it if you're going to say something about it now? I think that's probably the big thing that is going to be weighing on the minds of some of the owners coming up for 2025. And then we've got that ongoing thing about the charter deal right now with Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan and company against and Front Row Motorsports against NASCAR, and they could have a place in racing next year, 2025. And according to the rules, they're not supposed to, but they will be able to be an open car into the fields. But now, what that means, I mean, that's entirely left up to NASCAR, is the way they're going to look at it. I don't know. I think you're almost like Jack and the Beanstalk. I think you're almost like Jack, and you're kind of shaking on the vine a little bit, and you're not sure what's going to come down that beanstalk just yet. And I think that's what Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin are kind of doing with this. They're kind of shaking that vine to see how much they can stir NASCAR up and how far they can get them either upset or something in the direction of, you know, being able to come to a compromise out of this whole thing.
So since we went to the charter, let's stay there for a bit.
Yeah.
I wrote about this last week as well, and it's what stands out to me is now, of course, the side of 2311 Racing Front Row Motorsports, they've promised to appeal. What they were asking for
Hmm.
was a preliminary injunction that would allow those two teams to compete as charter teams
Right.
for 2025 while the case was going on. There still could be a ruling. I doubt it at this stage, but
Yeah.
I think they have a December 1st deadline, so we're coming up 3 weeks away
Yeah.
from that. But okay, so if they're competing as open teams, as open cars, I mean, there's all these contractual things from sponsors that
Yeah.
could, but also the drivers themselves could become free agents
Yeah.
if these teams are open teams. This could have wide-ranging implications.
It's just like Major League Baseball, probably back to the 70s and everything before the big thing of free agency came around. And you mentioned that term. If you've got an open driver and, an open seat, so to speak, and you've got a team that's competing in open competition, in NASCAR, that very well means if you have an opening on your team and you want Tyler Reddick to come back to Chevrolet, you could do that. It's kind of one of those things of you're not committed. And here's the other thing too: you've got the advertising dollar. How is it going to be possible to convince new advertisers to come on board with a team that could or could not make it from week to week, depending on how the situation is. So you've got that, and then that's sponsor dollars out there. That's sponsor dollars on television, sponsor dollars that's mentioned on radio and in different places like that. There's a lot hanging with this, and I know that Michael Jordan kind of came out and Denny Hamlin came out from the courthouse and they were talking about it. They didn't consider it to be a loss, so to speak. They considered it more of a little bit more of a challenge as to what's going to be going on and stuff. And he says, Michael Jordan was of the comment, we're not going to quit. We're not going to quit at this point. And I don't know who's going to win out in this one, because you've got the Michael Jordan ego that is seeks to be a winner in everything that he does, whether it's on the golf course playing golf or whether it's racing. He seeks to be a winner week in and week out. And then you've got the other side, which is NASCAR. It's like, you don't mess with the big boys that's been running this show for 75 years, and you just don't reach up out of nowhere and say, we're going to make sure that you change the rules of racing. They're going to have to come to a happy medium somewhere.
I've gotten good lately reading court rulings because I've been involved in a few on voting rights issues completely away from sports. And I read this injunction ruling, and what the judge said, it was the federal judge in the Western District of North Carolina, appropriate place for NASCAR to have a suit, was that the plaintiffs, in this case, obviously 2311 Racing Front Row Motorsports, uh, have brought up potential harms, irreparable harms. That's what
Mm-hmm.
a injunction would prevent if as this case proceeds. But so they've talked about, they've been able to present potential harms, but not actual harms.
Right.
I don't know that an appeals court, and ultimately if it gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, I don't know that they would see it the same way. I don't see that there's only potential harms here. These are actual harms that will come
Yeah.
if this injunction is not upheld, and this case has to linger its way through the courts for the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
It's obvious that if you don't have access to revenue sharing, if you're a charter team, if you're not a charter team, it's obvious that if you do not get if you're not in every race and you lose sponsor dollars as a result, if you maybe lose a key driver or two, it is
Mm-hmm.
obvious that you're going to be affected by that. I can't. I mean, I read the ruling. I just can't see what the judge did not see as far as that goes.
Yeah, I understand that, and I'm of the same thing. I've kind of read through it. I've kind of looked at it, and I'm like, how can you not see that this is not going to cause some kind of irreparable harm, whether to the sport or whether to racing teams? And if you really want a good example out of this whole thing, let's look at Stewart Haas Racing. Okay, Stewart Haas Racing, even though they closed down and they have shut down, they are no more after this season. I know that. Gene Haas is going to go through with having his own team next year. Cole Custer's going to be moving up from the Xfinity Series back up to Cup. But, he's got a charter. He's got a charter in there. He's got one of those hanging out. And if I'm not mistaken, too, I think you may have read it in the article, too. There is the potential that 2311, Front Row Motorsports, especially 2311, could get one of those charters that's still lingering out there from Stewart Haas Racing. So there's a lot of ifs and a lot of buts. And what the old saying is, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, then every day would be like Christmas. And that's kind of what it reminds me of at this point. We could see the potential of them going out onto the track, trying to qualify, can't make it because they have more teams in the field this year. Everybody wants to be at Daytona and try to make it for the Daytona race. So that means 44, 45 cars. Somebody's going to get knocked out. If you don't have a charter, you're out of it. So, we're at the tip of the iceberg. I think we're at the tip of the iceberg. We've not gotten down to the water level just yet as the way this is all going to come out. But it's going to come away one way or the other, and we've got to make a decision on it at least by the time we get to January, because the teams will be getting ready for the big clash at Bowman Gray coming up in February.
Yeah, we're even though the season just ended, we're not that far from the next one
Right.
getting back going, right? So
Yeah.
there'll be a little bit of testing, and then they'll be ready to go. Okay, so we talked about the state of the sport address a little bit. You talked about the playoffs are going to stay as is.
Hmm.
Um, Joey Logano. Let's get back to Joey. Okay,
Okay.
first you brought up something before we hit record. How, and I hinted to this earlier. If we had the points race as was before the playoffs, the old Winston Cup that we all remember from back in the day, Logano would not only have not been the champion, he wouldn't have been anywhere close according to the point system of before.
He wouldn't have even been in the top 10. I mean, in the old banquet that they used to have, it was the top 10 drivers. That's who got to go out on stage. That's who were shuffled out there and so forth. And, they made their little speeches. They got their checks or whatever they got and so forth from the old days. But not so. Joey Logano would have not even made that top 10. He'd barely been on the cusp, but he wouldn't have made it. And it's almost like the same thing as to what happened this season. He was not supposed to be in the playoffs. Technically, he was not supposed to be in the playoffs because he was eliminated until Alex Bowman's car missed inspection, post-race inspection, being a little bit lighter than what it should have been. And then, lo and behold, Joey Logano gets a call at home after he's already left the track that day and said, hey, you're back in the playoffs. And what does he go and do? He follows up with an instant win and qualifies at Las Vegas, too. Qualifies and makes it into the championship four. What else could you ask for with better odds like that? I mean, and especially coming together like they did. The one I really feel bad about is Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney drove that car, almost drove the wheels off of it on Sunday evening at Phoenix, and still just did not have enough to make it. I would have loved to have seen what teammates were going to do to fight for a NASCAR championship. Would they have beaten banged? Would they have been all over the course? Who was going to win it? They could have knocked each other out for that matter. They could have knocked each other out and somebody come up from out of nowhere and won the championship. But that's how it all came about. But if we looked at this in the Winston Cup standings, and I've got it pulled up on my screen here looking at it, Christopher Bell for Joe Gibbs Racing would have won the NASCAR Cup Series championship under the old points. Now, he would have beaten Chase Elliott by 5 points, taking the lead and championship from Elliott in the final race. Now, there would have been also William Byron, Tyler Reddick, Kyle Larson, Ryan Blaney, Chris Buescher, Alex Bowman, Brad Keselowski, and Denny Hamlin. He would have finished 10th in those points, as that would have been in the old series. And like we said, Joey Logano would have finished 11th. And I've got a graphic, and I'm going to probably write up an article about this and put it on Dickinson Media and kind of share it and talk a little bit about it. And there's still that same question. I think a lot of people think that if you're going to win a championship, you ought to do it by the total number of wins. And I think so too. I think you ought to qualify. If you have 7 wins on the season and you don't have anybody else that's even close, well, hey, you kind of miss out in a way. I'm just kind of this feeling that here NASCAR maybe needs to examine it just a little bit. I'm not saying go and throw the baby out with the bathwater or anything, but maybe they need to take a little bit of a closer look at this and see what they could possibly do to enhance it a little bit more. That's the only thing I'm asking for.
Do you still have that screen up with the old points? Because I have a
Yes, I
question
do.
related to that. So we have a championship four this year. How many
Uh-huh.
of those top 10, when you look at the numbers, how many of those racers would have gone into the final race with a legitimate shot at the championship?
Probably just what I'm looking at right here. It would have probably been either 2 or 3. I know Elliott would have been in there. Byron would have been minus 77 points. Tyler Reddick would have been minus 80. Kyle Larson at minus 130. Now I'm trying to remember what the original, how many points they gave you for a win out of this. That's kind of old. But I'm thinking probably back to Kyle Larson. It could have been anybody's ball game right there at that point. Definitely the first two with Chase Elliott, Christopher Bell. They would have definitely been in contention for it. But I think with Ryan Blaney at minus 329 and then Chris Buescher at minus 349 in the old point system, no way. There was no way any of these guys could have possibly caught fire and done something on the final race.
I'm starting to, I'm thinking through like, the stick and ball sports.
Mhm.
It's similar there too. We've kind of watered down the championships with these extended postseasons that we have.
Yep.
It used to be, I mean, you think about baseball, well, way back in baseball, back before the divisional era, which started in 1969, so that's going back a bit. But you had a pennant race in both leagues, and then they played a World Series. Then in 69, from 69 until sometime in the 90s, you had two division champions playing a championship series, then a World Series. And then
Hmm.
we've gone, everybody makes the playoffs now. It seems like the NBA kind of similar, NHL kind of similar, football. You got seven teams making the playoffs in each league now, and
Yep.
there's all these wild cards and everything else. I'm thinking of the great example of those 18-0 Patriots losing to the 9-7 Giants back in like 2007,
Yep.
losing the Super Bowl that year. Um, we you have it if you're the best team that day, and that's the case in NASCAR. I mean, it's not even like I can see a playoff situation where okay, the team who gets the most points throughout the playoffs is the champion, but I
Right.
mean, you're just the best driver that day of the four. I mean, you're not the
Hmm.
champion of the whole year. You're just the best driver that day of the four, and we're letting that person be the champion. It used to be. I mean, I don't know where I stand. I love the playoffs. I love the excitement it brings to us, but there was a value to, you're the guy who from February until November, you are the best average driver out there. You endured all those 9 months, and now you're just the best guy for 3 hours.
Yeah. Nah, I know what you mean. And it's, and who I feel bad for too is like in the Xfinity race. You had Justin Allgaier who came back and he won that race. He was a lap down, I think, and then he came back and he was actually there on the lead lap. But the celebration was for him, and coming back, and then Riley Herbst, who won in the race for Ford and the Monster Energy car. People forgot him. People weren't even, really looking at him. They were looking at Allgaier. And then and it was rightly so. Allgaier deserved it. But, how long does that last? It's only going to last for a few hours after that. Maybe they'll take you and put you on the Tonight Show, or they'll put you on Late Night with Stephen Colbert, something of that nature. But then by the time the banquet rolls around, which is coming up next week, by the way, down in Nashville, or in Charlotte, excuse me, you still kind of start wondering to yourself, it's like, really, is it worth it all? For this just, attention and so forth. And then they put too much, I guess, too much into you thinking that you're going to go well, case in point, it's Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin has been probably one of the most talented drivers. Yeah, you heard me say that. But Denny Hamlin's probably one of the most talented drivers. He's been able to gamble a little bit in order for him to try to make the playoffs. And he did right up until the very end. And then he missed the championship four cut. But here you go. This is just another example. Was it too little too late? That seems to be Hamlin's kind of persona here for the last several years. Will he ever win a NASCAR Cup championship? It's anybody's guess at this point. I think his best chance was probably this past year, and now he's losing his sponsor from 20 years of being associated with Joe Gibbs Racing, FedEx. FedEx is going by the wayside, and so he's going to be left all alone trying to figure out, hey, we've got to get some more sponsors on here, and am I going to have a championship year next year in order to pull something out that I could take home some money? It's up in the air. It's anybody's guess.
I feel like I'm doing the weave now because I'm gonna go back to our original discussion about the charters because I mentioned in the stick and
Yeah.
ball sports, you have a champion of one day, not a champion of the whole season. It feels like same thing there. I can't think of there's nothing even close to an equivalent of, you were talking about Denny Hamlin. That's what brought it back to mind. 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports. It's like the NASCAR saying, the New England Patriots and the Chicago Bears, you're not going to be full-fledged members next year because
Right.
you decided to sue over something. So, wins and losses won't count as much for you as they will for everybody. I can't think of this. I can't think of anything close to that. It's just so weird to think that these teams are going to have to compete as non-teams.
Well, and I look at this thing too. It's almost, and I'm not trying to bring a firestorm down on me or anything, but it's almost very Trump-esque. It's almost, like the thing of NASCAR is sort of like Trump in making the threat of anybody who stood against me, I'm just going to go and I'm going to put you in jail or I'm going to do this. it's almost like NASCAR is doing the same thing, and they're doing it to 2311, and they're saying, you don't want to sign the charter, then you're not going to race next year. You're going to have to go in as an open car and take your chances with it. Um, it's it's again, it's that it's the little guy against the big guy, and in a lot of cases, the way our world works now, the big guy usually wins. But you're still cheering for that little guy and stuff. And even though Michael Jordan's got more money than you and I both combined, with this whole thing, you're still kind of cheering for Michael Jordan because, hey, he is a minority out of this, okay? He is a minority owner in this car, even though, he owns a good deal of it, but still he is a minority. You're hoping that he's going to pull off a big victory out of this. He's been successful when he played basketball, not so much when he was actually owner of a basketball program like he was with partly with he played for Washington there for a little while and stuff. I think he played for
Yes.
Washington, then he went to, of course, to Charlotte, and then Charlotte's kind of been up and down, kind of so forth. But I'm kind of cheering for him. I'm kind of cheering for him in that way, and then I hope that he's going to go and he's going to kind of change some things around, not for the worst and not for the bad part about it, but for the better for the fans. And I think that's what he's got in mind. It's not just the team itself, but it's also the fans, having them entertained and coming back week after week after week. And there are a lot of people that go with that kind of attitude, and they say, "Well, NASCAR scripted. NASCAR is part of this other stuff. Yeah, I've seen how this is all going to end out." That's the reason why we lost so many of these fans when NASCAR kind of came into mainstream, probably in about the late 90s, early 2000. It kind of got above its raising, so to speak, as you might say in the South, and it wasn't the good old boy sport anymore. It became so commercialized, and once that happened, NASCAR took full advantage of it, and they said, we're going to take it commercial is what we're going to do. Just not like it used to be, and I don't know if it'll ever be what it used to be in the sport ever again.
I know Jordan's got more money than me. I wasn't sure he had more money than you. He
Oh, he
does.
does. He
He does.
does.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Damn.
he
Okay.
does.
Well, that is what it is. He's done well for himself. Oh, all those shoes and everything else.
Yeah.
Uh, okay. As we get ready to wrap up, okay, we haven't talked silly season stuff in a while, probably because there was so much going on earlier. But is there anything in terms of now? I say this knowing that we have all these caveats with these charters being out there for these two teams. Who knows about their drivers? But what is there anything new on the silly season front?
Well, right now you've got some drivers still looking to kind of wondering where. I mean, most of them have already found a place where they're going to be. Josh Berry's going to be with the Wood Brothers. I know that Noah Gregson is going over to one of the teams. I think he's going to Spire, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to check that. But some of the drivers there with Chase Briscoe, he's already taken care of. He's moving to Joe Gibbs Racing. So you've got most of the drivers there kind of spoken for, at least. They have already been taken care of. The big thing is going to be who shows up where next year by the time we get into it. Like the announcement just came out here a little while ago on Jayski that here Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson had a terrible year trying to run a car for Legacy Motor Club, and yet he's a glutton for punishment. He's coming back for more. He wants to run select races again, and it's like, Jimmy, do you not have the idea yet that your team is way behind the eight ball right now, and you all are so far behind the eight ball that you haven't even caught up? And I wonder if he's going to be able to, lift that team a little bit more because not been very pleased and not been very happy with Eric Jones and also John Hunter Nemechek's runs through the year. Some of them have been good, but most of the time, no, they weren't that good. And so that's a big question mark there. I think some people might say John Hunter Nemechek might be on his way out, give or take the year next year. With Legacy Motor Club. Eric Jones is there for a while. He signed another extension. So I don't know how it's going to go there in that sense. But, this open thing, if somebody goes one place, somebody decides to, and they decide to trade for one driver to bring another one in, we could be looking at something that is along the lines of just totally crazy happening in 2025 with NASCAR. I mean, who knows what could happen if that's the case, and you've got an open policy and open season, and you want to get a Tyler Reddick back, or you want to get a Bubba Wallace, if you want to get one of those drivers back and you want to get them somewhere and put them in at a good team, or they look at a good team and say, that's where I'd like to be, you might not be able to stop them from it. You might not be able to stop them from making the jump, and then they're completely out. They're completely out of anybody. So it's going to be crazy going into next year, no doubt about it.
In addition to being NASCAR fans, we're both baseball fans, free agent, the hot stove league's getting ready to heat up, and we're also college sports fans, the transfer portal. A lot of similarities between what we just talked about there for the last few
Oh
minutes
yeah.
and the free agency in baseball and then the transfer portal in college sports too, right? Well, Rod, this has been a fun season. It's hard to believe we've been talking every week since February. We're
Mm-hmm.
going to take a little bit of a break on that,
Yep.
but of course, we'll look forward to your articles. There's news to cover. There's the silly season news. There's this charter suit news. It won't be that long before we get back to the testing and getting ready for Daytona as well. So give you a little bit of a break, get your pipes all rested up and everything else, and we'll be ready to talk here in a few weeks again. So thanks as always, though, for your time and your insight.
Okay, no problem. I was just checking email this afternoon, and I got, of all things, an invite to Rockingham, as Rockingham is going to open back up for next year. And the media has been invited for tire testing in April of 2025 to come there and watch Justin Allgaier and a couple other of the Xfinity Series drivers. Yeah, that's going to be fun. I want to be able to see Rockingham, and I'm thinking very seriously being able to try to go to that and see what all the big thing about Rockingham is all about, because that's one of those tracks, just like North Wilkesboro when they brought it back for the All Star race, that's been fueled by taxpayer money. All this stuff of post COVID or COVID stuff, things trying to bring back the economy to some of these places. And I'm sure we've not seen the end of it just yet with all this stuff from Hurricane Helene. There'll be some other things thrown in there as well. But Rockingham is coming back to life with the possibility of having a cup race maybe there in about 2 or 3 more years. So we'll just have to wait and see.
In the meantime, keep up with Rod on Dickinson Media. It does a great job covering the local news scene down in Dickinson County, and we will also keep up with Rod as far as that goes with stuff on Augusta Free Press. Rod, man, it's always good to talk with you.
Good talking with you too.